During this session, please do keep your microphones muted and your cameras off, but we'd also like you to be aware that this session is being recorded, and if your camera or microphone do happen to be on, your image and voice might be incidentally shown as part of this call and future materials. For best viewing, I do recommend that you change your screen to speaker view, and you can do this by clicking view at the top right of your screen. Select side-by-side speaker. We will facilitate a Q&A session at the end of the presentation, but feel free to add your questions into the chat at any time. Now, I'm really happy to introduce our teacher, an author and modern quilt designer, Carole Lyles Shaw. Carole started quilting over 20 years ago when she decided to make quilts for her family members. She co-founded the Sarasota Modern Quilt Guild, where she also previously served on the board of directors. She is the author of Madly Modern Quilts and Patriotic Modern Quilts through Modern Quilt Patterns. Her work has been showcased in many exhibits throughout the United States, and her virtual teaching workshops are extremely popular. We are really excited to dive deeper with Carole into the meaning and behind the color of mood. And thank you so much, Carole. The time is yours for about 45 minutes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Susan, and welcome everybody. Thank you for signing up for the live session. And for those of you who will be watching the recording, thank you for spending that time with us as well. I am a quilter. I've been quilting for a lot of years, but I'm also a journal keeper. And so in this conversation, I'll be sharing with you some thoughts and ideas about journaling and how journaling and creative self-expression can come together. So I am going to share my screen. And just give me a moment to start the slideshow, and we will get going. All right. So if you have any thoughts or questions, please do put them into the chat, as Susan mentioned. And we will hopefully have some time at the end of my presentation for some quick Q&A. All right, so I have been quilting for over 25 years, and as Susan said, I do teach online, and that's been one of the gifts of the pandemic for me, to be able to teach people all over the world. But we want to start actually with a bit of interaction. And I want to encourage you to grab something to write with. It can be the back of an envelope and a crayon or a pencil, anything, and take a moment to really think about this past year. What have some of your pandemic moods been? And just, jot some notes down, some thoughts as you think about how you've been feeling and what you've been thinking over these past 12, 14 months. And then in the chat function, if you would just write one phrase describing just one of those moods, that would be fun to share if you would like to. Otherwise, keep it private. And if you haven't done so, tell us where you're zooming in from, what city and country you're in. So we'll give you a minute or so to think about what your moods have been like. Maybe they showed up in some of your dreams. And then in the chat function, just take a moment to describe one of your moods. And by moods, we mean thoughts, feelings, maybe obsessions that you've had. How have you been feeling and thinking about life during the pandemic? So while you all are doing that, I'm going to talk about journaling for a few minutes. Journaling, as I'm sure many of you know, is a really important practice for healing, for reflection, for planning. And it's really been known for, hundreds of years, that journals can be important records, both on a private level as well as perhaps for generations to come. Uh, as a quilter, I know we value any journals or notes that come with older historical quilts because they tell us about the life of the quilter. So if you are a journalist, you probably know that it can be a spontaneous activity where you just grab some random piece of paper and jot down some thoughts and maybe stick it in a more formal book later. And sometimes we're consistent with our journaling practice, and sometimes we're not. Sometimes we come in and out of it. I know that's true for me. I might journal for 6 months and then put it away for a year, and then be sporadic about it. Doesn't matter. Whatever we capture can be important. Having prompts can help, and there are journaling books that you can buy with lots of blank space, but at the top of the page, there's a thought or a sentence or a word that can just jumpstart your thinking. And sometimes those are helpful and sometimes not. Sometimes I've used prompts in those journals. Sometimes I've scratched about and just wrote whatever I felt like. I have a practice I call post-it practice because I tend to have random thoughts in the oddest places. And I don't always have one of my journals with me. So I'll grab whatever piece of paper is around, whatever pen or pencil is around, and I'll journal for 30 seconds, a minute, 5 minutes. And then I'll put that piece of paper away and paste it into my more formal journal later. And it's important when you're journaling, by the way, to capture the month, the day, and the year. And the location, if you happen to think of that. I just pulled out one of my journals from 1998 that I haven't looked at for I don't know how many years, and it was fascinating. And I'm glad I put the year, location, where I was, because that brought back those memories from a million years ago. It's also important, I think, to write by hand. Some people do like to journal on their laptop or, writing on a tablet. I think paper and pencil or crayons or paint or whatever you happen to have around is actually more immediate a form of self-expression. I think it opens up more thoughts and feelings. Even cutting, things out of the newspaper or out of a magazine or even a piece of junk mail and pasting it into your journal can be a fascinating way of also anchoring those memories in the moment. So if you're not a journaler or if you haven't been doing it for a while, I really hope that in this talk you find a little inspiration to pick it up again. I'm going to talk about self-expression and journaling and by describing a collaboration quilt. It was a commission that I received about 2.5 years ago from a nonprofit organization that worked with people who were in a self-improvement, self-development process. Some of them were looking to reclaim parts of their life and perhaps even start small businesses. But I was brought in or the request was, if I could make a quilt that would commemorate this activity. And I said, yes. However, I want to work with some of the people in the program to create the quilt. And this is the quilt that we created. First, before they did anything with the materials I'll show you in a second, I had them sit down, grab a journal, piece of paper, and then privately journal about their gifts and strengths. Their gifts and strengths. We said a few words, obviously of introduction and so forth, and they knew that this was eventually going to turn into a quilt. But we started with the personal, private reflection. Then I asked each person, it was a small group, but I asked each person to choose one thing from their journal that they had written and just say it out loud into the community. And I told them that I would be capturing what they were saying in my journal, my notes, and it would make its way into the quilt, or some of the comments would make their way into the quilt. After they did the journaling and, got a really positive, affirming mood set in the room, I gave them a table full, or I unveiled a table full of materials that you're seeing right here in front of you. Of course, I'm a quilter, so of course, it was all about the fabric. Now, none of these folks were sewers or quilters or anything else, and they didn't have to be. I asked them to think about their strengths and the gifts they bring to their community, to their family, to life, and focus in on one aspect of it and create, using these materials, a self-portrait. And I emphasized that it didn't have to be something that looked like their face. They were free to express that self-portrait in any way they wanted to. And then I gave them a very short time frame, only about 30 or maybe 40 minutes, because short time frames really stimulate creativity. And it also minimized for almost everybody. It got them over that, oh my gosh, I've never done this before. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not an artist. I'm not creative, all that negative thinking that can sometimes show up when we ask people to express themselves through art, through creativity. And it's important to help people move past that and just dive into the fun, which they did. You see a photo of the hands of one of the participants as she was cutting and pasting. We used glue sticks, very simple materials. And I gave them a foundation piece of fabric to work on. And on the right, you see 9 examples of the quilt blocks that they created. And notice that only one of them, the one in the middle row on the left, kind of with the green background, even looks like a, quote, human figure. But what was wonderful about the work they did, and by the way, I gave no criticism, no help. I said, this is your project. You do you, whatever you like. If you've got a question about how to physically do something, I'm happy to help. But I'm not going to intrude on your creative process at all. It's really important, whether we're just journaling words or we're doing something more creatively expressive, that we let go of that little critic that sits inside all our brains. What people were doing, because later they talked about the blocks they made, if they chose to, and what some of the symbolism was that they included. One person, for instance, talked about how some of the colors that they chose were important to them in their life. Those colors brought some memories to mind of times when they had overcome obstacles, or people who were in their lives that they wanted to evoke with certain colors. There were numbers in a couple of them, and those numbers had significance too. And so the symbolism was sometimes not that obvious, but once people talked about it, you could see their thought process. But even so, later on, when people saw the quilt who were not in the room and saw the blocks, they were really impacted very powerfully by just the creative power, the expression in the pieces that people had made. And here's a close-up. What I then did is I took the blocks and I put them into an actual quilt. And here are 2 close-ups of parts of the quilt. I used a process of printing onto fabric to print some of their words and phrases that they had expressed after the private journaling start. And these are all their words, not mine. I was really very careful to jot down exactly the phrases people were using, and I tried to incorporate as many of those as I could into the quilt. And I also used the logo of the two organizations that sponsored the activity. I also did not alter their blocks in any way. I was extremely respectful of the work that they had done. The only thing I might have done is stitch down some loose pieces just to make sure that the block, would stay secure. But other than that, I did not touch their work. So this was a very powerful experience for me personally, because I hadn't done this kind of collaboration work for a while in communities like this. And it just brought to mind for me how deeply creative human beings are. And I try to remind people about that in any venue that I'm in, because there's so many messages out there that we're not creative, you got to color inside the lines and all this other stuff that we hear as particularly young people in classes in elementary school, where we're taught art is certain, a certain thing, and some people are artists and the rest are not. Not true. Every human being has creative capacity, and I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here. So forgive me, but I just feel so deeply about that. So let's get interactive. Well, before we do that, I just want to pause and ask Susan or Trinity, are there any questions in the chat about this particular event that perhaps I can answer real quick?
I was so engrossed in your conversation and truthfully quite touched that I couldn't find my unmute. I think we did have one question that's from the group, and that is, do you print the fabric yourself or use as a service? And then I had one thought based on kind of what you were saying, and that was, I like how you're walking us through how we're feeling. It's actually quite exciting to take a moment here and get over this overwhelming feeling of the past year and current events, and to find out what our strength is. So I'm kind of curious as well, if that's a question you might ask the group.
Well, I'd love to do that. And actually, we'll have a chance in the prompts coming up that we can definitely add that in, Susan. So thank you. The question about printing on fabric, no, the text that you see in this slide, I use a printable fabric, and I have a basic inkjet printer. I think it's an HP inkjet printer, and there's fabric that's made specifically that you can run through a home printer. Some of it is washable and supposedly more permanent. This, of course, is an art quilt, so it's never going to be washed. It's to hang on the wall. And you don't need any dyes or anything. You just run it through your printer. You soak it in some cool water for a moment or a minute or two, and then you iron it, and it's permanent. And I've used this product for years and never had any problem with it fading or anything like that. It's called June Taylor, and it's Tailor, June Taylor inkjet printable fabric, and I buy it from either a local quilt shop or Joann's has it online and in their shops.
One other quick question, Carole. What motivated the background choice that you had?
The background fabric. Thank you. This fabric is from a line of ombre fabrics called Gelato, like the ice cream, Gelato Ombres. And the automatic captioning is having a little trouble with that. It's Gelato, Gelato, Ombre, Ombre fabric. And I love this line of ombres. I buy them from equilter.com because most local quilt shops don't carry very much of this line of fabric. So I just default to them or Etsy shops if I'm looking for a particular color. And I chose this particular one, which runs from a yellow, sort of a medium sunny yellow through orange into a deep, deep, dark orange, almost rust color. Because I liked the quiet color story that it told. And I chose the background fabric after everybody had done all their blocks. So I wasn't trying to match the colors of the blocks, but I wanted a color that would fade a bit into the background that wouldn't compete with the blocks. And I'll go back one slide again just to show you that little close up. And I also wanted one of the ombres that had the yellow and orange coloring, because for me, those are life-affirming colors. You know, the color of the sun, you know, brings us joy and hope. I mean, that color has a lot of meaning for me. And it was also meaning that I heard in the conversations I had with this wonderful group of people. And ombre also moves your eye around the piece with the, you know, little sparks of the lighter yellow here and there. And again, it framed and held the blocks, I felt, very nicely. I didn't want any colors that were too sort of cheery, cheerful. You know, I wanted something that was sober without being somber, if that makes sense. So I would like some more interaction. Grab those pieces of paper, journals, whatever you've been writing on. And here are 2 questions. Now, during the pandemic, I know that lots of folks, creative quilters in my quilt community, my global quilt community, we talk a lot about having embraced some of our creative activities or outlets and having some of them let go and not engaged with them. So what I'd love for you to reflect on is, what creative outlets have you engaged with since March 2020, when the world closed? For some, not for essential workers, that the world never closed for them. And so which ones have you engaged in, or, I'm sorry, that didn't come out very clearly. Have you in this past year picked up and maybe put back down, maybe started and stopped, or things that you are doing right now that are active in your life? And if you have a thought about some creative outlets that you'd like to pick up now, what might 1 or 2 of those be? And I want to also encourage you to add some ideas in the chat, particularly in response to question number 1. For me, of course, it's quilting and a little bit of journaling. I haven't done as much of it as I probably could have. But for me, it's been making a lot of quilts and engaging in some community activities. And I'll tell you about one of those in a moment. So I'm going to be quiet for a couple minutes and just let you think and add a couple thoughts in the chat. And a creative outlet can be anything from, as you can see down there, making bread, painting, crocheting, yoga, exercise, anything that you think of as a creative outlet. Gardening. So Susan, maybe you could share some of what people might be writing in the chat if we've got some thoughts coming out.
Sure, these are exciting. So Tina says, while quilting took a bit of a backseat for a few months, my houseplant obsession blossomed. What a time to find new things, right, Carole? Sally says, started with baking macaroons and then gardening and sewing utilitarian things, and now sewing with lots of color and pattern, finding joy in fabric. Neat. Crocheting mini afghans to use my yarn stash. Oh, that's excellent. More quilting, watercolor painting, which had never been done successfully in my life until now. That's Ellen. Diane is a quilter. Deb went back to cross stitch after a 10-year hiatus, and now wanting to try my hand at quilting and spinning yarn. Lots of inspiration there. Heather, hand embroidery, stitching, design, working toward master craftsman certification. Good grief, you all are very ambitious. Some gardening, would like to know how to use a sewing machine. Welcome to that club. Emily and Jason, during pandemic, they're in lockdown in their part of Canada, re-engaged with collaging, styling my outfits, lots of jewelry, and decorating my house. So I'm coming to your house. Needlework from Diane Clark. Marge says, beginner quilter, so everything I do is a creative outlet. Learning all the time, would like to try pottery. And Heather just one last little comment. She says, thank you for acknowledging that many of us are told we are not artists while we're still in our formative years. As a mid-50s developing textile artist who was strongly discouraged from art as a child, I really appreciate that. Everyone has an inner artist.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Heather. Thank you I'm glad that you appreciate that comment, because that activity that I ran, that you saw, the collaborative quilt, in my full-time corporate life, I was a leadership development consultant working with organizations all over the world. And I ran that kind of activity occasionally with leaders in leadership development programs, where we were talking about organizations and strategy and planning, but we also talked about ourselves as leaders, who we were, what we valued, what was important, what our legacy was going to be. And whenever I ran this exercise with a group like that, typically there was hardly anyone in the group who had an artistic practice, that at least that they acknowledged. Every single person in that room always came out with a fabulously creative result, and they were all stunned. They were all just stunned at how immediately creative they could be. Yeah, so I agree with you. You know, all those terrible messages people get even today about being an artist, it's just heartbreaking. Anyway, I want to tell you about one last aspect of my experience during the pandemic, or one aspect of my experience during the pandemic. I mentioned that because the world shut down, I quickly pivoted my business as a quilt teacher to doing it virtually, online, live classes. But the other thing that I did last year was I participated in a couple of virtual community quilt projects or sewing projects. And this is one of them. It was created by Rebecca Cinnamon Murphy, and you can see her name there. You can find her on Instagram, and I'm pretty sure she has her own website too. She decided that she wanted to create several collaborative quilts and then auction them off to support a couple of different community organizations in her city. And I'm blanking on the city right now for some reason. And one of the organizations, I'm sorry, she's in Chicago. It's right there on the card. After she created the quilts, she took pictures of them and sent the card that you see in the picture on the right. She sent a a lovely card to each of us who were in that particular quilt, along with a photograph of our block in the quilt. The two organizations that she supported are the Social Justice Sewing Academy. If you're not familiar with them, I do encourage you to look them up on the web and on Instagram. They are a fabulous organization. And the Chicago Community Bond Fund. And those were the two organizations that she donated the proceeds of the auction for the quilts. But all of the patches, all of the parts of the quilt that you see in this particular one, they were all created by quilters, mainly that she solicited over Instagram. I knew of her, but she was not, a friend, quote unquote, but I knew her work and had seen her posts. And when she posted the call for blocks, I just felt compelled to participate. It just seemed like such an inspiring activity for her to do. And she did this when a lot of us were feeling pretty discouraged, feeling pretty lonely, pretty disconnected from each other. A lot of us were feeling a lot of loss, and we weren't at the time seeing the gifts emerging. Eventually they did for many of us, but at the point where she initiated this, it was really a beacon of hope, frankly. So I made a block. I don't do much hand sewing, but you can see the words just barely in my block on the left, and the word I chose was justice. It was something very much on my mind. This was also during the time of many of the protests around the killings of Black men and women by the police, unjustified killings. And the Social Justice Sewing Academy, I knew that they were one of the beneficiaries of the funds, and I contributed to them in the past. So justice was the word. I just wanted that one word. No symbol, just the word. And I hand embroidered it in a very simple way onto a piece of fabric. And you notice my piece of fabric has some yellow in it. That's one of my favorite colors. And I sent it off to her. And I also did a similar kind of contribution to a couple of other virtual community projects as well last year, and actually in years before that. I didn't expect to get the card in the mail, so when it came with the photograph, it was just a lovely surprise to have that commemorative piece of paper. So I immediately put it into one of my studio journals to make sure that I didn't lose the card, that I would always have access to it. So with that story, I'm going to invite you to a final reflection, and again, some private journaling. And in a moment, I'll ask you to add one thought to the chat, but I'm not going to tell you what that is yet. But I'd love for you to reflect from today, looking back through the last 12, 14 months. What are you grieving that has been a loss? It may not be a huge loss, but if it feels like a loss to you, it's important. Also, though, what unexpected gifts have you received through this year? For me, as I mentioned, teaching virtually was an unexpected gift. And the connections that I've made with wonderful people, wonderful quilters all over the world. And lastly, what's one positive intention that you want to carry into the future and offer to others? And by a positive intention, I mean an action-based idea or an action something that you will express in an active way, I guess I should say, out in the world. To say, I will be kind, that's an intention, it's positive, but if you can put an action next to it, I will be kind. And when I go to McDonald's, I'm going to pay it forward by paying for the breakfast of the person behind me. Or I will be sure to be kind to every essential worker, even when I'm feeling a bit annoyed and harassed. I will thank them for the way that they've supported our community, whether it's a cashier in the grocery store or the young woman behind the counter at the post office when I've been waiting in line for 15 minutes. When I get to her, I'm not going to complain. I'm going to say, thank you. I appreciate the work you're doing. And I know it's tough work. How do you put in your intention into action? So let's take 4 minutes. And I will look at the timer. And at the end of it, I'll ask you to share a thought in the chat. So 4 minutes of quiet time. And for those of you who may be watching the recording, I hope that you're taking this time to do some journaling as well. You have 2 minutes of journaling time. And I'd also like, if you're ready, to give us a few words, just a sentence, a short phrase about one positive intention that you want to carry or you will carry into the future and offer to others, if you would like to do so. You're certainly welcome to keep it private.
Carole, let me mention really quickly, and I put a note in the chat, and this is just for everyone. While this is being recorded at any time at no time in the future will we share the comments or the names of the commenters to anyone other than this group. We might consolidate general themes of emotions and ideas and convey that here or there, but we will keep all names confidential. And we just want to thank everyone for participating and sharing their thoughts.
Thanks, Susan. Okay, we have 1 minute left, and if you could shift, and even if you're not sure how you're going to put your intention into action, just put as much down, if you would like to, into the chat. Okay. It occurred to me I didn't probably didn't share one thing that I've lost, one thing that I've grieved, and that is not seeing my family very much. My family lives in Maryland and I live in Florida. So I only saw them once, well, twice last year in February, in the before time, and then in October when there was a bit of a lull. So that was very unusual. Normally I see them 4 or 5 times a year. They come here. So I definitely felt that loss. And I gave you the example of a positive intention, that kindness towards essential workers. I have carried that as an intention for months, and I remind myself to do it in an active way, because even though we still talk about essential workers, I'm not sure we give them enough credit. So before I think we still have a few minutes of sharing. I'm going to just show you one last slide, which is where you can find me. That's my website, carolelylesshaw.com. I hope that you come visit my blog and perhaps take a workshop with me in the future. So I'm going to stop my share and go to gallery view. And Susan, what kinds of intentions have people shared with us?
Sure. So again, we're not going to talk about the names here. Let's see. I'm still on quilting. So these are in response to the names. My parents, some body parts, cancer was a factor, amazing friendships and connections, unbelievable motivation to stitch, 10 extra hours per week for losing commute and working from home, showing gratitude, appreciation, and not letting stupid stuff get me down. Good goal. Lost the structure of my days. 2, better mental health and being able to work from home and getting pregnant with my first baby. I think everyone needs to say, yeah, congratulations there. Continuing to learn and relearn and unlearn about diverse experiences other than my own, and how we can be a support as a white ally. Beautiful. Positive intention, selfless giving of self and time, not expecting anything in return. This one, to create gifts of encouragement, to spread hope. Another, positive intention, letting things go, taking more time and avoiding rushing intimacy. Wow, I want to hang out with everyone here, right, Carole? I learned to listen more and speak less and to show grace to people who think differently than me. I intend to continue this practice going forward. To work on being patient with people, groups whose ideas and actions I do not agree with. Work on being kinder. Here's one, breathing more and taking time and space. Another, grieving, traveling freedom. I mean, that's what's missing. That's a good one, we feel. Gifts, creating greater connection with family. And intention, sharing Black stories of resilience, strength, and creativity. Loss of friends and connectiveness is a grief. Mine is, although you have to keep my name out of it, is to do a better job of creating a safe space for myself and for others. Anybody else? Carole, have others? Would you share yours?
Myself? I'm sorry, Susan, what were you asking me?
Yours. Do you have any you want to share, Carole?
Oh, yes, I did mention, the grief of not seeing family, and my intention is very much around acknowledging the worth, value, and struggles of essential workers, the people who did not have the benefit of working from home. Sometimes I think the media acts as if that's a universal experience. But many people that are in my family went out to work every day at personal physical risk in terms of possibility of catching COVID. So I think it's important that we all keep that in mind. And I want to thank you all for sharing those very powerful thoughts. It's very much appreciated, very much appreciated. I want to hold up a journal page just to show you all. And maybe I can pin myself. Let's see, or spotlight. Yeah, there we go. This is a journal page from my 1998 journal. And I even pasted in some flowers. They're still there. When I did this journal page, I was actually in the Virgin Islands, and I'm glad I wrote that down because I would not have remembered otherwise. Here's just a drawing that I did. Oop, turn it that way. So I just wanted to show you that I was really serious when I said, you know, a journal can be as formal or informal. Actually, informal is better, and collage-y as you want. I love picking up, you know, pieces of paper from places I've been, tickets, and even the parking stub. When I go visit a museum, I'll sometimes stick that in my purse, and often that'll make its way into my journal. Because I'm usually journaling when I go visit a gallery or quilt show or anything artistic related. I'm usually writing down thoughts. Welcome.
Thank you, Carole. We have other questions that I think are going to be coming, so maybe if some can stay just a few minutes over, we might just do that. But I wanted to say what an essential session and service this has been, to pause and help us give voice in a gentle way for self-expression, and to learn that we can be artists in many different ways, help us process the tangle of emotions and inspirations of the past year, and anchor those memories, as you said, to the sense of self. I would like to ask this group one last question, and at the same time, really encourage everyone on this call to please jump on the Woodlawn website and see what other sessions that we have coming up. Always very exciting. We're thrilled about it. But I'd like to ask all of you this question. Tell us what impact this session had for you. And I'll go first. For me, I feel calmer. Now that's something when you're looking at, you know, 14 months of a little bit of jangled nerves. So much calmer, and I appreciated being asked about what my thoughts and feelings are. So I would encourage you all to put it into the chat as you exit, and to definitely, you know, reach out to our presenter at any time and engage her in other ways. So I want to thank everyone for joining this call. Please do take a moment to put your last thoughts in on the chat, and we'll keep this thread open for just a couple of minutes afterward as well.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Carole.